Thanks again, everyone, for coming. And this week's topic is document labels, best practices and special uses. So really what we'll be going over is kind of what we see as far as how people use document labels, what we've recognized really works for people, etc., so that you'll be able to take advantage of that as well. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me a second here. So first, what are document labels and where can you apply them? Document labels are Pipeline's custom color-coded document labels that apply to individual documents so that you can classify them or categorize them in some way. You can set as many as you like, up to 14. Again, they're color-coded, so they allow a visual way of, at a glance, being able to categorize or identify a particular categorization of a doc, whether that be its status, who it's assigned to, et cetera, and we'll go into that in a minute. But again, fully customizable, color-coded so that you can have some visual representation for each of the docs. Where can you actually apply these document labels? You can apply them on transactions. So on a transaction, when you've got docs here below, you can hover over, once you've got transaction labels assigned in your account, then you can hover over a doc. You'll see the little label there, hold down, and then specify which label you want to actually apply. Okay, so on docs, you can set that there. And again, you've got that color-coded visual representation. If you hover over any of the labels, you can see the full name, but they're in their collapsed mode, they're non-intrusive so that you can just have that color tagging. All right, so on transactions, on unassigned docs, same deal. You can go ahead and assign the document labels here. Doing so here will allow admins, if they're working through these unassigned docs and getting them over to their transactions, specifying whatever state you need them to be in when you're working in unassigned docs. Then once they get passed over or assigned to the transactions, then those document labels will carry over to the transactions as well. Okay. And we'll talk in a minute about the different types of labels that you can assign and how some will be appropriate for unassigned docs, etc. And then the last area is on the unreviewed page. You can assign them the same way. And here they're certainly useful for as a managing broker is reviewing these docs. If there's something missing, actually they can add a comment and then they can specify whatever categorization of the doc that they need to via those labels. All right, so those are the three areas that you can assign the document labels. Keep in mind, like I just mentioned a moment ago, that you can combine your doc comments or use them both, basically, your doc comments and your document labels to make them even more powerful. In other words, you can give them whatever appropriate document label you need to, and then also add a doc comment to further specify what you're trying to convey there. And a good illustration of that is kind of what we advocate in general about these doc labels. Your objective with the doc labels is to classify these documents, again, visual color coding, but to really classify them into a particular category. So you want to kind of keep it generic. You don't want to be too specific. Sometimes we'll see people who say missing signature, sent over to TC, and get very specific about where it's going and what needs to be done, etc. And when you do that, you start to lose a little bit of the value of these categorizations because you're so specific about what needs to be done. Try to look at them again more as these broad classifications so that you can at a glance see, oh, all of these reds indicate, this particular scenario, or all of these blues represent this, versus having to be so specific. If you do need to be specific, that's more appropriate for these doc comments. So maybe you can say, instead of need signature from XYZ, maybe it's just need signature is the name of the label, and then you can further specify awaiting signature from XYZ in the doc comment. Okay, so that's a more appropriate place to be more specific so that you can keep your labels generic. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that there, combining them with your doc comments to make them even more powerful. So let's dive into some practical examples of how to use them. So when should you apply these labels? One of the common methods or reasons for assigning them is to assign them to an individual person. So for example, let's say you've got certain managing brokers review certain docs and other managing brokers review others. You can specify the reviewer's name as a particular label. right? So, Jim's review, or for Jim's review, or for Mary's review, etc. If those two individual brokers actually have kind of separate teams or separate transactions that they're reviewing exclusively, and there's no crossover, you probably want to look at separating those brokers into separate locations. That way you don't even need to specify who reviews which docs. They'll only see their own docs if you do that. So if you're at that point, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you look at how to set that up. It'll make your workflow far more streamlined as far as the work that needs to be done to manage who needs to be looking at what. Okay? But again, that is a common method, though, when there is crossover between the brokers, to be able to specify via each doc who needs to review it. Same for admins, who needs to be taking a look at these docs to check them off, perhaps, right? You can specify the admin names. And then the last one here, broker review. I mentioned managing broker reviews when I mentioned reviewer names, but this broker review here is a little bit more generic. So earlier I was talking about how you can specify a broker's name, but in a lot of cases, as you saw when we were on that pipeline page, you may want to just be generic and say needs broker review in general, needs review or needs broker review. In that case, you're just flagging it for review because you've only got a single managing broker that's reviewing these. And in that case, the managing broker can come to this page, filter to only show their docs that need review, and then filter those. That way they're only looking at those docs that have been flagged by an admin as needing review. And then for further ease, they can even bookmark this page. So drag it down here to their bookmark area. And then that way, whenever they need to review docs, they simply click that link instead of having to execute this filter. All right. All good? Okay, so back to the list here. So that's assigning to a person. Another probably even more popular method is to categorize docs, use the doc labels to categorize their docs. And some examples of those could be rejected offers, so flagging all of those so that those stand out, backup offers, closing statements, HOA docs, sometimes disclosures, contract docs, receipts and invoices, etc. Okay, so whatever works for you, however you need to classify docs. These are just some examples, but you can use them in that way as well. And the way that helps me, in addition to having those color-coded visual cues, is that I can sort them to have an additional visual cue. So if I hop on over here to a transaction, and I can do this on unassigned or the transaction or on unreviewed, but when I'm on the transaction, if I click this column header for the label here, it will sort those documents by the label. So here I can see all of my needs review in a nice group, etc. So one more visual cue that helps me group those like labels into their own groups. Okay. Another method is to status the docs. So sent to title company, signed, unsigned, seller signed, buyer signed. That gets a little more specific, but again, some common ones that we see that are actually perfectly fine. It's not too specific, and it's broad enough to be able to, at a glance, see what's going on. Approved, incomplete, etc. Again, whatever your current terminology is that works for you and helps. And then the last method is to alert about something. The most common doc label I think we see overall is missing signatures and missing initials. We see that in most accounts when that are using doc labels. Sometimes missing pages, incomplete, even more generic there, do not send for whatever reason, etc. So, and those are often red, just to really flag those. So again, whatever you want to kind of look at your process, your existing process, and how you look at docs or what you want to flag docs as, and then just go ahead and apply those to these labels. They're generic enough to be able to reflect whatever you need them to reflect.